Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name's George Moldaver. I'm the New South Wales Chair of ATSI, and it's my job to do only two very simple things. One is to welcome everybody. The second one is to introduce the moderator for the session, Trevor Dennis, which I'll do in a minute. He in turn will introduce our speaker. But before we get underway, let me acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands at which we meet, acknowledging that some of them are online and different places. We're here in Gadigal country, and I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Now we will get underway with our speaker, and I'll have a few words to say at the end of the session about their program for next year. Trevor.
Thanks very much, George, and welcome everyone. Look, I think today is a very exciting day because if you work in the health space, or even if you're a patient in the health space, you realise how much of society's resources are devoted to the delivery of health services. Health in New South Wales is the largest single budget item in the state. So we're very privileged to have Susan here today. I'm lucky enough to share one of the large metropolitan health districts, and so I have very regular contact with Susan, and she's a great colleague and a great professional. The breadth of responsibility of the secretary, it's not just the hospitals, it's not just responding to COVID, it's the mental health facilities, it's interacting with the Commonwealth, and even in these difficult times where budgets are tight, making sure that we continue to push forward in areas like research and innovation, and that we're at the forefront of what should be done around issues of diversity and equity and equality in health. And then with partners, the various MRIs medical research institutes that we have within the state, and the various university partners. So it's great that Susan is here today to tell us a little about what are the trends, and maybe looking forward a little bit, what will be happening in healthcare delivery and research. Susan has been Health Secretary for 2.5 years. And before that, you probably would have seen Susan on television almost on a daily basis when the Health Minister was giving an update on what was happening with COVID, and where Susan ran the SHEOC, which was the State Emergency Coordination Centre dealing with COVID. Susan's background is in nursing, and very proud of the fact that she started her career in nursing, and I think we're enormously fortunate to have somebody of Susan's calibre leading the state in health. And I'll hand over to Susan.
Well, good afternoon to you all, and it's lovely to be here. I've never been in here before, so it's nice to see another part of Sydney's history. Could I also add my acknowledgement to the Gadigal? I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that it was and always will be Aboriginal land. Trevor's given you a bit of a history on me, and I might fill in a few blanks for you before I get started and to talk about New South Wales Health. I started nursing in 1988 in Bathurst, which is where I grew up. And when I finished my nursing studies there, I went off to Broken Hill, and I spent 10 years in Broken Hill. It was a very valuable part of my life, and I'm so grateful that I did that, because from a nursing perspective there, I was able to do things and experience things in my clinical practice there that I probably would not have had the opportunity to do elsewhere. And when I left Broken Hill, I actually went to work for the Nurses Association. So I'm probably a living, breathing example of anything's possible. I was appointed as the secretary by a Liberal Premier with that background, so there you go. And I'm still in contact with Dominic Perrottet, even though he's left our sunny shores now, and he was a very good person to work with in the years that we worked together, particularly during the pandemic. I've been an executive workforce director in Trevor's Patch now in Northern Sydney and Central Coast, before becoming the Director of Operations in Northern Sydney Local Health District, the state's Chief Nursing and Midwifery Officer. And then, of course, I happened to find myself in the Deputy Secretary role that was responsible for the operational aspects of the New South Wales health system. And I held that role for 6.5 years. It's a tough gig. It's a 24/7 job. And I was unlucky enough to find myself in that job when the pandemic hit. And as a consequence of the role that I had there, that's why I was operationally responsible for all of the aspects of the pandemic on a health side. So every time you saw my good friend, actually, Kerry Chan, and she is by far our biggest celebrity in the New South Wales health system. Every time you saw Kerry on TV, you know, with or without her glasses, just know I was in the background, you know, sometimes trying to pull her hair together after she'd been up all night, literally all night, having to then front the media day after day after day. But every time she came out with something that was the public health objective, I was the moron in the background trying to make it work. And it was very hard. It was incredibly hard. And Brad Hazzard, who was our minister at the time, Brad was actually my local MP because I lived in his electorate. So, you know, we worked through that together, and I still talk to him fairly regularly, and we reflect on the fact that no one really will ever know what it was like for us during that period, making it up as you went along, basically. And, you know, it was heavy, and we do in all seriousness suffer a degree, I think, collectively of, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this, and I know Kerry wouldn't, of, but, you know, there's a bit of post-traumatic stress for us, and I know for the whole of society, but it was a challenging time. I picked up law along the way as well, so I managed to be admitted to the court as a lawyer just after I turned 50. It's God knows why I did it, but I did. And then here I am. I find myself as the Health Secretary. New South Wales Health is a very, very large, complex, challenging organisation. We have 180+ thousand headcount staff across the state. By far the single biggest health system in the Southern Hemisphere, and spread across 228 hospitals, hundreds of community health centres, millions of overnight stays, 3 million emergency department attendances a year, hundreds of thousands of surgeries, and at the moment, an incredibly challenging budget environment. And we're not alone in that. That's a phenomenon that's being felt by health systems around the Western world in particular, on the back of COVID. And, you know, we had, I will say quite bluntly, rivers of gold from a financial perspective flowing into the health system during those years. We had an additional $9 billion injected into our budget over those COVID years. We have a $35 billion a year budget across health, so it's already very large. We are deeply unpopular with treasurers of any colour, and we do our best with that money to steward that money in the best interests of the 8 million people in New South Wales. One of the challenges for me, so you can see from my background, I've, you know, obviously had a clinical workforce, operational type of background. One of the challenges for me when I became a secretary was to make sense of our research and innovation agenda. And I'm quite open about the fact that it is not my strong suit. I don't pretend that it is. You can't be good at everything. And I've had to educate myself around what it is we're trying to achieve, and ably assisted by Anne here, who's a wonderful part of our team at New South Wales Health. I got together some people, Mary O'Kane, Don Nutbeam, Ian Jacobs from UNSW, who's now back in the UK, to you know, talk to me about what it is we needed to do across New South Wales to position ourselves better. We have remarkable people in our health system. We have remarkable innovation, we have remarkable research, but we're not where we need to be. When you look at the stage across the country, both in Victoria and Queensland, who are ahead of us in terms of attracting venture capital funds and research grants. So we do reasonably well, but we certainly could do better. And with the help of Mary and Ian and Don, I started to think about what it should look like. And so the first part I wanted to start, typical bureaucrat, I suppose, even though I don't think of myself in that way really, was to think about the structure that we had across the health system. And so we've done some work to give effect to that, and I think it was the right thing to do. We created a deputy secretary that has research as their priority, to lift it up in our organisation, and so that it was very visible to our system and beyond. And beyond that, we've then worked to deliver a strategy. Ian Jacobs, I don't know if any of you in the room know Ian or knew him when he was here in his role at UNSW, but he was very direct with me, and which I appreciated. And that was, look, you can change your structure, Susan, but that's not going to fix your issues. And of course, he is absolutely right about that. As a health system, clearly it's important to us that we have a vision for what is it that we want our research and innovation to deliver. And clearly that has to be focused on patient care, patient outcomes, and how we bring all of that together. So with that, we have been working away on a strategy. We've got a fantastic group of people, including Peter Beattie, who, as you would know, was a former Premier in Queensland. And he also gave me some very interesting reflections. His reflections were years ago when he was in, politicians do like to tell stories in certain ways, so we'll accept that. But his advice to me was, when he was the Premier of Queensland, and I can't remember the name of the group that came knocking with very large amounts of philanthropic funding, they'd come to New South Wales, and we were like, no, look, we're okay, thanks. We've got the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. We don't need your money. And of course, with that $500 million went to Queensland, and they started Smart State up there. Now, when you look at it, it's quite interesting where you see the money flowing from a venture capital perspective, and not, I don't mean interesting in a good way in our case. And it's not all about money. It's not all about money, but of course, money is important. So what we've been doing with our strategy, and with Peter's assistance as well, is thinking how we can better organise ourselves. There is, of course, competition. There's competition between universities. There's competition between our own health services. When I first started as Secretary, I'm very visible in our system, and I'm always out in it doing something. Last week I was in the Supermax part of the Goulburn Jail. So you never know where you're going to find yourself, which is an interesting place to be. But we have health staff in there, which is why I was there. And so, what I was going to say was that when I first started, everywhere I went, every district in New South Wales, we've got a health precinct here. We've got a research innovation precinct. And because of my own background, I was an ICU nurse when I worked in Broken Hill. I am a Virgo, I'll admit. So, take the star signs or leave them, but I'm a very typical Virgo, and I like to see order and so on. And I couldn't see it in the way we had ourselves organised. And it's not to say that there hasn't been amazing work. There's been incredible work over many years in this system. But I guess this is one of the benefits of being the secretary. You get to, start to try and shape things a little bit yourself. What I wanted to do was to make sense of the precincts that we have, because Westmead has one, Northern Sydney has one, St Vincent's has got one, Wagga's got one, Newcastle's got one. The point is, what do they all do? Does anybody outside New South Wales Health know what they do? Is there duplication of effort? What are we doing? And it's not about trying to homogenise our system into one great big behemoth blob at all. I think it's very important that local innovation is able to thrive across New South Wales. There will be, you know, particular things in each area that I think rightly should be focused upon, but we do need better coordination. So currently, I'll read these out to you because I can't remember them all off the top of my head. There are 6 emerging strategic directions. We've consulted hundreds and hundreds of people and experts around this. So clearly what we want is a thriving ecosystem. We want coordinated, collaborative, inclusive approach to research and innovation. I think that goes without saying, and being clear about who does what, so that we can make sure when we're trying to go after money, if it's grants or venture capital money, we've got a clear map for people and they know where to look. Strategic investment. So building a portfolio of investment to target areas where we position ourselves to harness the current and future opportunities. An open assets philosophy, so mobilising the existing assets. And we have enormous assets across New South Wales Health. Successive governments have invested heavily in the health system, not just within our day-to-day operational budget, but within our capital budget. And we have, look, obviously I'm biased towards New South Wales Health. I make no apology for that. New South Wales Health is a very good health system on any level, anywhere in the world and also across Australia. We are far advanced in respect of our data assets and holdings, but do we do the best with them that we could? I don't think so. And my predecessor, Elizabeth Coff, had started some work on making our data more available, which was an important piece of work and set us up well for the future. We want a place-based foundation, as I said, so that we've got, so that some of the whole is greater than all of its parts, but that the parts still have their opportunity to do what they need to do while reducing duplication and sharing opportunities. A pipeline approach, so generating value from our investments. And finally, research for all. And I think this is an important aspect of the health system. For those who've been in it for many years, like me, research should not just be for a chosen few. It should be something that is commonplace across our health system, across all of those many staff that we have. And in the end, from my perspective, it really is, our objective has to be that we are going to continue to improve the care of the people that we look after across this great state. And at the moment, and as I said to Trevor earlier in another forum, with a tight budget environment, I think one of the big risks we've got as a health system at the moment is that we stop innovating and hunker down and keep the lights on and not focus on the future. And I think it's fair to say that whether you work in the health system or not, as a citizen, all of our futures depend in one way or another on the New South Wales public health system, and it has to be and continue to be a world leader. There are many, many, many more things I could tell you about New South Wales Health, because despite the many challenges that it has, despite the incredible capability it has for things to go horribly wrong sometimes, on most days it doesn't. In all of those occasions of service, we deliver amazing care to our communities. We've got the most amazing staff that you could ever hope for. And, you know, my role in the years that I'm privileged to have this job is to steward it forward for the future. So Trevor, I'm happy to take questions because I don't like to stand and talk on and on and on, but I'm happy to take questions and also from you, which I may or may not answer because I've learned from quite a few politicians over the years, and I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
I won't move the microphone. I did read the other day that someone said if you ask an impertinent question, you're more likely to get a pertinent answer, but I'm not intending to do that. Can I ask you to talk about Aboriginal health? Because I know that's a huge passion of yours, and maybe people in the room will not be fully aware of the disparity.
Yeah. Thank you, Trevor. Yeah, look, I think when you're in a job like this, as I'm sure many of you in the room know yourselves. People start asking you very quickly, actually. I was no sooner, in the hot seat, and people are asking you what you want your legacy to be. It's like, I've got to work out what I'm doing first before I start worrying about legacy. And to be honest, I'm not a person who is focused on my own legacy, because New South Wales Health is a big, big system. When I do finish in this role, I'll be out the door, and within a short period of time, it will be like I was never there. And if people even remotely remember you fondly, that's, you're probably doing okay. So there are two key priorities I have in amongst all of the millions of others. And one of those is improving Aboriginal health in this state. And we have a long way to go. And as a kid growing up in Bathurst, and I've just turned 55. I think I've chosen to be quite open about the fact that I did all of my education in Bathurst. And I'll tell you a funny anecdote about my maths teacher, if I remember in a minute, Trevor. And I then did nursing, as I said, and I went to work in Broken Hill for 10 years. And during all of those years, I really received no education whatsoever about stolen generations and things that had happened to Aboriginal children and their families in my own lifetime, and was still happening, certainly. And in 2022, on Sorry Day, I made an apology to Stolen Generations on behalf of New South Wales Health. And I guess from my perspective, I didn't want to be yet another non-Aboriginal person making that apology and ticking that box and feeling good about myself for a moment, and off I go. So we've been very intent on giving a lot more weight to the work around improving Aboriginal health across this state. Sadly, racism is alive and well in the New South Wales health system, and I'm not going to pretend that it's not, because but it is. And I've heard some harrowing stories. I've heard harrowing stories from our own staff who are Aboriginal, who their colleagues, in some examples, have not recognised as being Aboriginal, and have said things in front of them that is woeful. So it's a very interesting environment for us, but looking at it from a positive perspective, we've engaged incredibly well with our district chief executives and supported by their boards to really shine a new light on this. And I think that from my perspective, as I say, in amongst all of the other priorities, what could be better than to look back over a period of time and think that we actually genuinely made a difference in partnership with Aboriginal communities. We learnt the hard way during the pandemic around the vaccine. So I was responsible for the vaccine rollout, and it was an incredibly difficult time. And one of the things that was difficult about that was that in Aboriginal communities across the state, rolling into town with non-Aboriginal people in white cars saying, here's a vaccine, did not work. And we very quickly had to adjust ourselves. So we are very focused on that. Again, there's lots I could talk about. We've engaged incredibly well with Stolen Generations organisations, and I think, we've got that as a key priority. And the other one, of course, is the health workforce. And it's hard when you're running an organisation the size of New South Wales Health with very disparate workforce across a large geography and many different facilities under lots of different leadership teams. One thing I've learned is that you've got to be overt about what you think and feel about how you want the workplace to be. And again, we've got some work to do there. Things are a bit different from when I first started nursing, certainly, in a somewhat paramilitary environment in nursing. But, we have got room for improvement. And I've got a short anecdote of recent times where every fortnight, I don't know if you get these newsletters, Trevor, do you get my emails every fortnight in my pink shirt?
No, I don't.
No, well, I'll add you to the mailing list. We send an email out across the system, and it's my way of communicating broadly with our staff. And a recent one was mental health, and looking after each other and looking after mental health. And the email goes out, and the following day I get an email back from this woman who works in one of our health services in an imaging unit, and I'll paraphrase what she said to me. The email was about that long. I wish I could block your emails because you're a lot of full of crap. I mean, she didn't use that language, but that's what I took away from it. And I have had a terrible time at work. I have been humiliated. I've got this dreadful grievance process going on, and here you are sending out emails about looking after mental health. So the following day, I was down in Canberra because my other part-time jobs are I'm the chair of the Health Workforce Task Force that reports to health ministers. I'm also the co-chair of the Vaping Enforcement Working Group with the ABF Commissioner. So I was down in Canberra and I had a few moments, and so I rang this woman because her unit that she works in was at the bottom of her email to me. And when she got on the phone, I said, hello, it's Susan Pearce. And she was like, I think she probably thought I was ringing to, have a go at her about the email, I suppose. I said, I'm ringing you because I think for you to send me an email like that, you must be really at the end of your tether. And I just want to understand from you what is going on. And I said, are you free to talk to me now? Are you busy? She said, no, I've got to see a patient. I said, okay, here's my mobile number. Can you call me tomorrow? And she did. So I spent about half an hour with her on the phone the next day, and she has been incredibly poorly treated. I mean, there's just no question of it. She started a grievance. And what I heard in her voice was that she reflected on her email to me. She said, it wasn't very nice for you to have to open an email like that. And I said, oh, it's all right. I've had worse, I'm sure I'll have it. A small thing that had snowballed into a huge grievance. She'd written to the chief executive twice. The chief executive hadn't responded. As it turns out, they'd been away when the emails had come in. And I managed to connect her with the chief executive. And I think if I'd have sat there and clunked out an email that said, I'm sorry that you feel that way, thank you for your email, I'm sorry you feel that way, to be just like, so my point in that story is that whilst I can't do that for every single one of our 180,000 staff, the reality of it is that we do make things pretty complicated across the health system in terms of how we treat each other sometimes. And I'm, one step at a time trying to change that.
I might ask you, we'll come to the mathematics.
Oh, yes, don't let me
sector.
forget that.
No,
yeah.
but I might just ask one other question before I throw it open. There's also significant disparity between metropolitan health services and resources and assets and rural and regional. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I disagree with you, Trevor.
You disagree, okay. Were you going to write something?
Look, I don't think that's, I think there are degrees of it. We have invested enormously in rural and regional New South Wales. I think where there are some challenges, look, there's no question about it. The further west you go, the poorer the health of the population is, rates of obesity, smoking, etc. There are also poorer access to primary care. So this is not all on the New South Wales public health system. I'm not trying to, make out that we don't have a role in it. We absolutely do. But there is incredible investment going on to support rural and regional communities. And given that, the first almost 30 years of my life was spent in rural New South Wales and remote New South Wales, I obviously have an active interest in this. When I worked in Broken Hill in the 90s, in the ICU there, in the old hospital, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Broken Hill.
Well, I was the manager.
There you go. So in the big old building,
Yes.
I worked in that unit there, and I would have given anything to have had access to a staff specialist in Royal Prince Alfred Hospital to seek advice from, because in those days we had very little. We had a lot of overseas trained doctors, and no disrespect to them, because the state has relied on overseas trained doctors forever. It probably will forever. And anybody who tells you that workforce maldistribution in the health system is new, it isn't. But what we have now is a link between Royal Prince Alfred Hospital Intensive Care and the Broken Hill ICU, so that when they do have a difficult patient, they can get on a video call with a staff specialist or an expert nurse at RPA and have that conversation about how to care for those patients. Now, this is not about workforce replacement. It's not a silver bullet. There are no silver bullets in this system, but there is great opportunity. The increase in the number of cancer centres that we've built over time, the increase in the IPTAS rate so that people can access the care they need, But fundamentally, we're trying to deliver the care as close to home as possible for the people across New South Wales. And I think that whilst there are some disparities, it's a more complicated picture than we are solely responsible for.
Sorry for that impertinent question.
Oh, that's quite.
Can I throw questions open to the audience? Yeah, and perhaps I might repeat your question just for the sake. Yeah, please.
There. Brent Stephen, ex-professor and software engineer. As an engineer, our creed is to make things better. Always make things better. Sorry, to make things better. Yes. I can talk louder.
Yeah, that's
There's 400 engineering students out there, so I can shout to the whole room.
Okay, now working.
But then they throw paper airplanes at you. No, it's still not working.
That's fine.
You can.
Yeah.
It's quite a small room. Anyway, as an engineer's creed is to make things better. And so I was delighted about 10 years ago to come across the Agency for Clinical Innovation. And I was just amazed at what they were doing.
Mm.
They were investigating a thing called telehealth,
Mm.
1995.
Mm.
And I'm sure you know just how effective that was.
Mm.
The reason they were doing it was because stroke victims south of Wollongong, there was no neurosurgical registrar. So if you had a stroke,
Yeah.
sadly I had one, which is why I found out about this, you'd pretty well Buckley's chance of
Yeah.
getting a neurosurgical register to recommend the treatment, which was, I can't remember what it is now, but you get this drug.
Yeah.
Within an hour of having a stroke, I was back to normal. I could do a whole engineering lecture before I decided I was okay. So it was wonderful. Thrombolized, that's the
Yes,
word.
That's it.
So telehealth helped roll out neurosurgical registers.
Mm.
And of course, when the pandemic came,
Mm.
it was wonderful.
Mm.
So I'm praising the ACI, and I just hope you are praising them too, because I think it's a wonderful organization. They're way ahead of the curve. And as I say, research and improving things is my creed, and I hope it's their creed and your creed as well. So there's no question there. There's just a big thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. No, look, the ACI, as I'm sure you're aware, is a part of New South Wales Health.
Yes.
And one of the things to Trevor's previous question that's interesting about telestroke, which is what you're talking about, is that in many cases, patients in rural communities get faster access to those services than people in metropolitan areas because of that service. So it's quite remarkable. And the pandemic, I think, was an interesting time for us for many reasons. But the telehealth work that we did, so you'll remember back in March 2020, which it's horrifying to think that that is 5 years ago, almost, really horrifying. We had to turn off our non-urgent elective surgery, but we also had to slow down and turn off outpatients clinics. Now we have about 17 million occasions of service in outpatients clinics a year. We increased our telehealth access to those clinics by 700% in 2020 because of the necessity associated with the pandemic. And what we learned from that was that actually our patients quite liked it. It takes our staff a little bit longer to accept that they're not always right about these things. So we've tried to hang on to some of those learnings from the pandemic. It's been very important for us because whilst it was very traumatic, it did teach us quite a bit, and telehealth is one of those things. So thank you for your feedback.
So Peter.
We're going to try the microphone.
It's working online, not necessarily.
Is that getting any?
That's fine.
Any input?
Online.
So, really, Tyrone, I'm mentioning that from the point of view that the opening, and you'll all be very welcome to go to UNSW, and you were talking about Ian Jacobs earlier, that a few years ago with the then Dean of Engineering, Mark Hoffman, Ian Jacobs, myself and my sister all had a lovely lunch together, and that was the kernel or the start of the Tyree Health Institute being formed. It was opened last night, and one of the needs that we have is an input on where our research will go and how it is conducted and who will conduct it and how it interrelates with other faculties. And one of the things which came out in discussions last night, and this comes to maybe efficiencies in the hospital system, is that it was stated, and this is unqualified, that maybe 50 to 55% of all people that get into an ambulance have got a medical issue rather than a physical issue that can be treated with operations or drugs or so on. And there seems to be a lack of information as to how you can pigeonhole where someone ought to go, and do they hold up the whole of the hospital system, whether they're being triaged here or whether they're being sent over there for an appraisal, which never stops, and so on. And I just wonder if you've got any thoughts about how that might be done, because I know where there's a place not more than about 10 kilometres from here that would love to be trying to help get an answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Dorothy Dixer. Look, also during the course of just before the pandemic, I think we'd set up a couple of things, but just before Omicron hit, we stood up within the ambulance service a virtual centre. So now when a 000 call comes in to New South Wales Ambulance, we can do a secondary triage of that call, and we can send the call to staff specialists who are emergency department physicians, nurses or paramedics, who can give advice to that person over the phone. And it's reduced our ambulance responses by up to 30%. The other thing that we're doing is Premier Perrottet in, I can't remember what year it was, 2022, end of 2022, decided that he was going to race off to Victoria with Dan Andrews and announce urgent care centres. You'll be aware the Commonwealth has, is provisioning a number of urgent care centres across the country. And Premier Perrottet and Dan Andrews, for whatever reason, decided they're going to do some of their own across the state. And we begged him to not talk about centres, but to talk about services, because bricks and mortar are not the answer to the challenges that we face as a health system going forward. We've got plenty of that. So we've created what we're referring to as a single digital front door, and Minister Park is very, very intent on getting a 3-digit number that will enable the community, rather than calling 000 if they don't think they require an ambulance, to call, and it may be 222. So currently we're working with Health Direct. The call goes, so it's happening now with a 1-800 number, but we're going to Health Minister's meeting in early December to try to get this 3-digit number over the line, and it's quite complex, as you'll appreciate. When they get through to Health Direct, there's a triage process that occurs so that they can either be directed into a GP appointment that we are paying for in the background. So we've contracted GPs in various areas. It may be that the call can be dealt with via video or a phone consult with an electronic script and so on. Or it actually might be, you know what, you're really unwell, you need to dial 000 and go to an emergency department. One of the things that we appreciate is that the way of finding the decision-making about where to go can be very challenging for people to work out. And so we are well on the way with that, exactly what you're talking about. And when Omicron hit us in late 2021, we were very lucky that we had stood up, for example, the ambulance VCCC, because we got flooded with phone calls from people who were quite afraid. You'll remember that, up until that point, one case of COVID was a disaster, and all of a sudden we're trying to tell the community there'll be 25,000 cases tomorrow, but everything's going to be fine. Quite a challenging communications exercise, and we were able to use the VCCC to deal with people calling in and flooding the 000 line. So it's a great question, and it's a great topic, and we'd of course be very happy to talk to you about it further.
Good, Angela, perhaps we'll get the mic to that, so everyone knows.
Thank you. Always good to hear from you, Susan, inspiring as usual. I'm Angela Dawson. I'm the Associate Dean of Research in the Faculty of Health at UTS. We've seen you a few times. I'm interested in learning more about your vision for research capacity building, given that you're going to launch your research or innovation and research strategy in December. So I'm wondering what your ideas are in terms of building the skills of New South Wales Health research skills, and what role universities might play in supporting that.
Oh, I think it goes with that. Thank you for the question, and nice to see you again as well. My daughter's a student at UTS, which is something she'd be horrified if she knew I was telling you.
No, we keep it quiet.
Oh, do you? Oh, dear God, I won't tell her that. She would be mortified. I think what's interesting about research capability is that when you are in uni, you're learning it, and it's part of your curriculum and the work that you're doing as a student. And you hit the health system and it really grinds to a halt for most. So from my perspective, doing my, studies over the years, you do all of that in your university work, but at the coalface, it's not something that really, as I said earlier, except for probably, a relatively small proportion of the health system, is actively focused in. So I think there's great opportunity for us to do better. Look, we've talked about a lot of stuff, there's the sort of the pre and the post in terms of that translation of students into the health system. I think we've got enormous opportunity as part of our strategy to build that. You could argue that on each and every day that we have staff out there running quality improvement exercises for patients, it's based on evidence. And, what are we counting as research, I guess, is the other question. And how do we define that? And what is it that we're talking about when we're talking about research? Because I think in the minds of many, it's, the hardcore, researchers out there that are making world-changing findings and so on. But I'd really like to think about what that whole continuum looks like.
I'm going to go here, there.
Oh, and then yeah.
Yesterday, I had a fairly uncomfortable morning watching the testimony of the chief nurse of the Cheshire Hospital, talking about the support she'd given to possibly the most famous, or one of the more famous nurses on the planet. I was a bit discomforted about her response, as a lot of people were. Would we be able to avoid the same situation? It was about Lucy Letby, the nurse that will not see freedom from prison for the rest of her life, probably. But the chief nurse, yes, she'd killed 7 babies and may have killed another 7. Do you have any? I'm sure you paid some attention to this. Do you have any observations on how it was handled in Cheshire and how we would do better or worse?
I'm not going to speak about Cheshire. Of course, I know about that case, and it's unimaginable. Would I like to think that we could avoid that here? Yes, I would. Every day of the week, we have a process where we have any adverse event of a very serious nature, so i.e. a baby dying in one of our hospitals, comes through our system in a risk incident brief, and I get all of the serious risk incident briefs every day, as do all of the executive across in the department. We review them. So if we spotted, look, even one baby death, we would ask questions. Because it does happen that, that there is infant mortality in terms of, where a birth hasn't gone well. Sometimes there are things that happen during the course of the birth where, the baby sadly doesn't survive. So we see that. We also have, as part of our governance structures, a
a specific group that is focused on our maternity services as well. And so there are multiple layers where we would expect to see that picked up. We look for patterns. We look for statewide risks around any such thing. We have in the past picked up clinical incidents where one clinician was involved in a couple of incidents, even though they're in different hospitals. What it relies on, and I can't speak for the UK health system. I can only speak for ours. We, of course, pay attention to those because the question you've always got to ask yourself is, could that happen here? And what it relies on very heavily, which brings me back to the culture of our workplace, is people have to report issues and incidents. And they have to be confident when they report them that someone is going to take notice of them. And so the safety of our health system is dependent on our staff reporting. It's obviously dependent on managers out there every day, obviously paying attention to the clinical quality and safety of the health system. But I would like to think that with the various systems we have in place, as I say, at multiple levels, that we would detect such a case.
So we go, yeah.
Yep, I'll try to be quick. Thank you very much, Susan, and I'd like to thank you for what you do and also every healthcare person in this room for the care and professionalism that you provide in the system. So thank you. Everybody's got their own story. I've got a very short one. I've got a daughter-in-law who's got this exactly the same experience from Broken Hill to Sydney, but she's in Darwin. And the backup that she's getting through Darwin from your people here in Sydney is just fantastic. So again, thank you for that. And it is incredible. Darwin's a long way away. And then the last thing I'd like to do is to thank you for your leadership with the recognition of traditional owners and what you're doing with Aboriginal health. Some people think there was a big switch off in October last year, and it was a disappointment, but it's re-energized a lot of people, me amongst them, and I can see with you too. So thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, well, no, that's fine. If the microphone's there, then we'll come closer.
Thank you, Susan. I'm chair of the Woolcock Institute of Medical Research, and therefore I'm interested in your thoughts on research. You have mentioned UTS, but and I wonder whether thought they had any particular role. I mean, you know, the Woolcock is respiratory and sleep, and how does it work? How can its work be perhaps more integrated or more directly impacted, without in any way diluting its basic underlying research? I haven't really had any ideas on that. And bearing in mind the whole financial stress of the whole.
Yes, yeah. Look, I mean, there's always financial stress. We're sort of, we're pretty knee deep in that at the moment. But you know, look, I think that as part of the research strategy that we're doing, the MRIs are a very important part of it. As well as the RTEX. But I guess I come back to my earlier point. It's how the coherence of all of those things hangs together. And I think, you know, and this is where Anne and myself and our colleagues in the ministry are working with our, you know, these exceptional colleagues, as I said, in the form of Mary O'Kane and you know, Don Nutbeam and Ian and others, to bring about a picture where we have a much better line of sight about what the MRIs are doing. I mean, obviously there have been attempts in the past to bring MRIs together to make them bigger and so on, and people have views about that. I'm not necessarily advocating for that. What I'm advocating for is that, you know, if the Woolcock is known for respiratory, et cetera, then the world knows about it. I'm not saying the world doesn't know about it, but I think bringing coherence to our strategy is really what we're seeking to achieve, and with you, not to you. Yeah.
We look forward to that.
Thank you.
We look forward to that.
Thank you.
Ted Tua, look, is it working? Yeah. Background, many years in health asset and service strategic planning. quick question. I've covered prisons health, Aboriginal health, you name it, health, rural health, including Broken Hill, asset strategic plan, and the new hospital, or the hospital that's now old, but
Yes, 24 years.
and the forensic unit down at Long Bay. Look, the issue for me, I suppose, is I do gateway reviews for government as an engineer, right? So, and what struck me is that the social cost of health is not brought to the budget table. And that's the fact that, you know, when you do your studies on service strategic planning, probably 5 to 6 people every day visit somebody in hospital, and there's kids in care, there's people off work. So the person in the hospital is the smallest part of the budget loss. And that's not accounted for in what we call telehealth, distributed health. And so when people like you go for budget, the biggest cost is not in the room, the social cost of community of not having distributed health. I see the attempts to put hospital in the home, today's press about hospital in the home. And when we do gateway reviews, that dollar budget, which is probably 2 or 3 times the budget for the built facility, is not on the table. About saving that money for telehealth, hospital in the home, sorts of initiatives you're pursuing. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for treasuries to get reprogrammed to allow that to be brought to the table in the cost benefit equations that go to allocating funds to these telehealth initiatives. I remember Broken Hill was the first time telehealth, when we went there, they had telehealth because they had a dial-up modem and they could do mental consultations in the bush. And and when you do little rural hospitals, they didn't have any access to telehealth at all. Now they've got better, but ambulance is the same. When they go for the money for that, it doesn't get past the gateway reviews. So some thoughts as to how you harness that dollar.
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that it comes back partly to the comment I made earlier about bricks and mortar. You know, bricks, and I'm not being disrespectful to my political masters because they're all the same. In the sense that, you know, they're standing at the front of a building and cutting a ribbon with something that's tangible is appealing, and you can understand why, because you can see it. And I think that's where, when we're having these conversations and, you know, with politicians of whatever type, it's being able to give them a visual so that they can translate that when they're talking about it publicly. It's very hard for a health minister to, and I think Minister Park, to be fair, is working very hard on increasing this message around, you know, the 4 walls of a hospital building itself are not the answer to the future. But you've got to be able to paint the picture for them about, if it's telehealth or what exists out there in terms of the work that we're doing that is unseen and therefore at times unrecognised, is how can they describe it better? And so we agree with you. We have very large, very impressive hospital buildings across New South Wales, and we're very lucky to have them. Paying to run them, however, is another whole thing. And the operational costs associated with the capital program, you know, when the financial impact statement's done for a building, you know, 7 years before it's built, it's basically not worth the paper it's written on by the time the hospital's up and running. And we're faced with a huge recurrent cost. The issue for me at this, you know, relatively late stage of my working life in New South Wales Health is pretty obvious, that if we keep replicating and doing the same things we've always done and expecting a different result, we're quite mad. And I think that there is a way forward for the future. And I think getting our, you'll be familiar perhaps with the RPA virtual hospital. Again, we just had that in time, unrelated to the pandemic, but it was just in time for the pandemic, and we're able to run those virtual services into our special health accommodation, hotel quarantine, throughout the period of hotel quarantine. We have been able to attract funding for that model of care via Commonwealth funding by demonstrating the value in that, and it is far harder than it should be to do those things. So I think all governments, Commonwealth, state, etc., we have to bring them along the journey. I think to bring them along the journey, you've got to bring the community along with you, Because if the community expects to see bricks and mortar, it's very hard to bring the governments along with you. So, if you've got some ideas about how we can better do that, I'm all ears.
20 years doing it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Susan, do you want to tell the mathematics teacher story?
I
or
don't know, the
no?
moment's probably, I'll do
Well,
it.
all
do
right, okay.
I went, just to finish on a light note, yeah, well, I wasn't very good at it. My maths teacher in year 10 wrote me a note during the pandemic because he'd seen me obviously talking about the vaccines or something. And he wrote me a note to say thank you on behalf of, I went to Kelso High School in Bathurst where I grew up, so public high school. And he wrote me a note to say thank you on behalf of the Kelso High School community for everything that you're doing. And I replied to him and I said, thank you, Mr. Strove. I have my year 10 yearbook from 1985. And in my yearbook, he wrote, Susan, you may think your smile will get you everywhere in life, but your mouth is going to cause you many more problems. And can I tell you, he was 100% right. I think he was a little bit horrified when I took a screenshot of that note in his writing and sent it to him. Anyway, I'm getting an award, Trevor, from the Kelso High School in December. So isn't that nice? It's only nearly 40 years since I left, but so that's my story. There you go.
Well, that's a terrific story on which to end. Susan, thank you. We all know how busy your day is, so thank you for making the time. I'm, as I said in my introductory remarks, I think I'm enormously pleased to be part of the health system, and I think everyone says without hesitation we've got a world-class health system, and we have a world-class leader of our health system who should have been recognised by her high school earlier. Sometimes better to wait.
Better
So
late
look,
than never.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
I think it's been a
Trevor.
great job.
Thank you
Please
very
thank
much.
Susan. I can't wait to.
Well, I'll just thank Susan again on behalf of the division. Just listening to Susan, I'm a humble engineer, so all this medical stuff is kind of interest, and it's a revelation to me in a way. But as also as a former senior Treasury official, I've seen the other side of health funding. I have to say, we're always very wary of health secretaries, who are probably the biggest source of expenditure in the budget, and it's always very difficult to rein them in. But no doubt they do really good work. So thank you again, Susan. It was a great speech that gave us a lot of insight into New South Wales Health. Now, I'll just mention a few things about our program for next year. If some of you haven't been to one of these lunches before, we have a program of 4 lunches, and the first one next year will be Rod Sims, who's a former chair of the ACCC, and now he's a chair of the Superpower Institute, looking at basically exporting our sunshine and wind in the form of hydrogen to Asia and whoever wants clean energy. So that'll be the first of our lunches next year. There will be 3 others that we've yet to formulate, but please keep us in mind. We will be having a relationship with our sister academy, the Royal Society, whose focus is more on the social sciences, where our focus is more on technology and science. But nevertheless, there's an overlap there. We're going to pool our resources, if you like, and have a wider population, if you like, of potential attendees at our function. So please bear us in mind, and hopefully we'll see you next year.